So the Mariners have obvious needs in their infield, right? But, the way their roster is set up right now makes it possible for them to add impact in the outfield instead. So why aren't they doing that? Will they look to do that? We'll discuss that and more coming up here on the Locked On Mariners podcast. Colby, hit it.
You are Locked On Mariners, your daily Seattle Mariners podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Ahoy, sailors. It is Wednesday, January 29th, 2025. This is Ty Gonzalez and Colby Patnode for the Locked On Mariners podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today, we're going to tell you why the Mariners should pivot and start looking at the outfield market, or rather, why they should have been doing that this whole damn time. We'll also discuss what Ha-seong Kim signing with the Rays could mean for the Mariners and why they weren't in on Kim themselves. But before we do that, quick shout out to our title sponsor today, FanDuel. Super Bowl 59 is here, and there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. New customers can bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. And if you want to hear from me and Colby even more and help support the show, check out our Patreon. All you have to do to check that out is click the link in the description of this episode. So the strengths of the Mariners position player group is obviously catcher, one with Cal Raleigh, but also the outfield, right? They have Victor Robles, they have Julio Rodriguez, they have Randy Arozarena, and also Luke Raley, and they have the DH spot open to rotate those guys through. And, Colby, there's been a lot of rumors about the Mariners this winter. We've heard them linked to a lot of players. We typically don't hear stuff like that as frequent as we have this offseason about this organization. They've been, for the most part, leak proof, but that hasn't seemed to be the case this year. Yet, while we've heard them connected to a ton of players, we haven't heard them really connected to any outfielders. And so that brings me to a point that I've made time and time again over the last few weeks here, is that the Mariners are approaching this offseason in a way that just doesn't align with what the meta of the market is. The Mariners want to try and trade prospects straight up for major league talent, and most teams, probably 26, 27 teams, don't want to do that right now. So you're in a position right now where the teams that want your prospects don't have the major league infielders that you want. And the teams that have the major league infielders that you want don't want your prospects. However, the teams that do want your prospects, or at least theoretically would want your prospects, do have a couple of interesting outfielders. White Sox have Luis Robert Jr., who we've talked about a lot, and we heard the Mariners connected to during the season. The Marlins have Jesus Sanchez. And you have the ability here with Luke Raley to move him to first base. And therefore you would need to essentially replace Luke Raley's role that he's currently serving in, or at least that he served in 2024. So you could easily make it work. And at this point, where it seems like you're hitting brick wall after brick wall after brick wall on the trade front, doesn't it make sense to just pivot and try and get, better by any means necessary, no matter the position? Because right now, the way your roster is structured, you can make it work.
Yeah, it's one of those things where, early on in the offseason, you have a plan, you want to try and stick with it, fine, whatever. But we are 20 days away from the Cactus League season starting. We are 2 weeks from pitchers and catchers. Like, your plan didn't work. You have to pivot. Now, there's still options out there in free agency that you can, go get and improve your infield. Are they potentially impact, middle of the order type of guys? No, they're not. But you're probably not going to get that at this stage. But if you wanted somebody who had the opportunity or the possibility to be middle of the order type of guys, then yeah, Luis Robert makes a ton of sense. And Jesus Sanchez against right-handed pitching at the very least makes a ton of sense. So, to me, I don't understand why you would rather roll into a season with, Donovan Solano as your everyday first baseman when you could just go sign, for example, Austin Hayes just signed with the Reds for $5 million. Why not have move Raley to first? Hayes is kind of the fourth outfielder / DH, and then Solano's free to move around a little more and do other things. So, like, why not add a bat like an Austin Hayes? Just because he doesn't play in the infield doesn't mean that you shouldn't be interested in that type of player either. Of course, you could always shoot higher, like Luis Robert. There's certainly risks there, but that's one of the only reasons he's available at a reasonable price, we think, this winter, is because there's risks there. And Robert, kind of rotating through the outfield, and everybody else, the other three outfielders rotating through the DH kind of on a daily basis, and Raley primarily playing first base, allows Solano to play some second and some third right now. And it pushes, either Ryan Bliss or Dylan Moore to the bench role, which they're much more suited for. So it just makes a lot of sense. You could just push one of the outfielders into the DH, push Raley back to first base, and then all of a sudden you have Donovan Solano who can play second and third, like theoretically stand there. At the very least, it's another option. Your lineup is deeper. You need a deeper lineup right now, almost regardless of where those players play. So why aren't they interested in Robert or Sanchez or even like a Mark Canha type of guy? Like, why are they seemingly dead set on trying to acquire players who aren't available, like Matt Vierling and Alec Boehm? I don't know. It doesn't make sense. It's bad. It's just bad team building to sit here and say the team has to look like this. Otherwise we're not interested. That's what bad teams do. That's what bad front offices do. You have to be willing to adapt. You have to be, water and find the cracks in the market right now. Particularly, again, when we're 2 weeks away from pitchers and catchers reporting. Like, what you wanted this offseason to look like, you failed. It's over. You failed. Okay. Yeah. So you have to go into the season with a shot, and that means you have to add more talent to your lineup. And if that means the best way to do that is to go get, take a shot on a Yoan Moncada and then go get, Jesus Sanchez, and Raley's the everyday first baseman now, then that's what you have to do. You do it. Like, you don't be dead set that you need two infielders. Okay. Go get an outfielder and an infielder and make it work that way. You have the at-bats to give a fourth outfielder, give them to. And oh, by the way, it's a nice little bonus feature by getting another good outfielder that you have a little bit of Victor Robles insurance in case he craters, which is totally a possibility. So it just makes way too much sense. And the Mariners don't even seem to be willing to entertain the idea, let alone, actively, and
that's because of Mitch Haniger, right? Players. It's because of Mitch Haniger, I guess.
But again,
it shouldn't be, but it's probably because of Mitch Haniger.
Yeah. Which DFA Mitch Haniger. He brings no value to this club. None. Zero. Zip.
He was Nothing. Literally a negative value player last year.
He can't run. He can't field. He can't
not hit. Not having Mitch Haniger on the roster might be money better spent. That's $17.5 million better spent than having him on your roster, frankly. Mm-hmm. And I get it, the clubhouse presence, blah, 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 blah. That's not worth $17.5 million. That's not worth essentially burning a roster spot and limiting my options on the market for. It's not at all. So, yeah. And like you mentioned, the other thing that's really frustrating about this is that it seems that they're just assuming, Victor Robles is just this guy. All right, maybe he's not like the fringe MVP candidate that he basically was since he joined the Mariners last year, but we've fixed him. He's going to be like a 3-win outfielder this year. Like, they're just seems like they just have that locked in, and I'm not there with them. Like, I'm open to the possibility that they fixed him, and this is like Victor Robles is just really good now, like totally. Sure. But there's the chance that what we saw was just an anomaly last year.
If Victor Robles isn't an everyday outfielder, you're kind of screwed. Like, that's the place you set them. He doesn't have to be a star like he was last year, but he has to be good.
And frankly, your roster is just not good enough to make assumptions like that. It's not. It's the reason. It's the reason.
Ryan Bliss and Dylan Moore and JP Crawford bouncing back, and you're already banking on a lot to happen. And probably the least likely thing that you're banking on to actually happen is for Victor Robles to be an everyday player, because he's only really ever done it once in his entire career.
It's the reason why, major leaguer trades don't even make that much sense for you.
Might be in a year or two, but it's not this winter, and that's the only winter we care about right now. So Yeah, the Mariners have kind of like boxed themselves out of the market by refusing to adapt. And I mean, they were already pretty much, out of it with the ridiculous budget, but the front office has done, has hurt themselves even more with the restricted budget by not being willing to adapt to what the market says the market is. And, the market always is what the market says. You don't get to dictate the market. Sorry. The market gets dictated to you and you have to adapt to it. That's how it works in professional sports. And they pretty much by all reasonable standards have refused to adapt to the market. That's on them.
So kind of related, there was a trade idea that you wanted to talk about involving Luke Raley that we're going to go over in just a moment. And also we're going to talk some Ha-seong Kim, or Ha-seong Kim rather. But first, a reminder, this episode of the Locked On Mariners podcast is brought to you once again by FanDuel. All right, folks, Super Bowl 59 is here. One game, two teams, endless possibilities, and there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. Whether it's predicting the first touchdown, calling the MVP, or even betting on the coin toss, FanDuel makes it easy to get in on the action. With live betting all game long, you can adjust your bets as the game unfolds and feel the thrill from kickoff to the final whistle. The live betting feature lets you stay involved no matter what happens on the field, and the app is super easy to navigate. Plus, knowing that you can place a $5 bet and potentially win $200 in bonus bets for the Super Bowl, that's the icing on the cake. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. Bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Bet with FanDuel, official partner of Super Bowl 59. And you're listening to the Locked On Mariners podcast. So kind of related to the discussion that we just had. Colby, you texted me last night that you got a trade idea from someone that you actually wanted to talk about. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. I got a text from a friend of a friend, I guess, is the best way to word it. The friend of the friend works in the industry, as in baseball. And he just wanted to know what I thought about this. He knows I obviously do a Mariners podcast. He wanted to know what I thought of the idea of the Mariners acquiring Jake Cronenworth and Eggy Rosario for Luke Raley. The idea being here is that the Padres need to shed salary. We know that. They don't want to trade King or Cease if they can help it, but they do need to shed salary. They've hit a bit of a roadblock with Luis Ariz. The offers aren't nearly what they thought they were going to be, and they're having trouble finding a suitor for him. And the Mariners need infielders, and the idea is that Cronenworth plays second base, Rosario plays third base, and you still need a first baseman at that point, but Solano, in theory, covers that for a little while at the very least. Essentially the Mariners take on salary to acquire a prospect who can help the Mariners in theory in 2025 and kind of kill two birds with one stone. But you are leaving first base open. It would mean finding another outfielder would be pretty important as well. But this might be where Mark Canha comes into play, who can play first as well as the corner outfield spot. So I think the idea itself is pretty interesting. I don't think it's something the Mariners would do, but I think it's something that it's an interesting idea, and we kind of discussed this on Monday. We had a listener send us a question for the mailbag about like, hey, could the Mariners take on a bad contract to get a better player, blah, blah, blah. This is similar-ish to that.
Sure.
And so, I just thought it was pretty topical, and hey, what else are we going to talk about?
Sure.
Luis Robert again and again and again.
I think this is dead for two reasons that are basically connected to one another. One, we talked about this before when it comes to Cronenworth trades. I just don't think the Mariners are going to sign up for a guaranteed 6 years on that contract, even though they should be able to trade that again if they want to get out from it. But I think it's dead on arrival for that reason. And
it's
then
$11 million a year. Like, it's not
and
anything
then on top of
outrageous
that,
for a player as good as Cronenworth is.
Yeah. And then on top of that, you're trading an above average strong side platoon hitter who's still pre-arb for this year.
Right. But you're also getting an above average defensive second baseman who's at least an average hitter. Hits from the left side. He would be the best second baseman you've had since Cano. Like, I feel really confident in saying that.
Yeah.
At $10 million for this year. And then you take a shot on a guy like Rosario. I mean, yeah, you'd rather have Raley, but Rosario can theoretically play third base. He's had a couple cups of coffee in the big leagues. They haven't gone extremely well, but he has performed in the minors. So it's one of those things where it's like, okay, that's kind of interesting. I think the Mariners would be more interested. Obviously, if they could get the Padres to take on, Garver or Haniger, but then that kind of defeats the purpose. The Padres aren't necessarily looking to save money long term, although that's a bonus of trading of trading Cronenworth. They're kind of more interested in saving money short term. So I think at that point it's dead from the Padres' perspective. I think it's possible that the Mariners, if they could do this for like prospects, like if this is like, hey, we'll give you Harry Ford and we'll give you Ty Pete and we'll give you, whatever, Logan, doesn't matter, right? Mm-hmm. Like, if you can do that, then we'll take the $10 million hit on Cronenworth this year. And we'll take we'll take Eggy, because essentially what you're doing is you're kind of buying an extra player by helping the Padres out, because they need to cut payroll, and theoretically you can still add payroll. So I thought it was an interesting idea. I think, like you said, I wonder how committed the Mariners would be or how interested they would be on committing 6 years of this. Now, there could be money paid on the back end. Like, there are details that can make this trade work a little bit, but I think at the end of the day, it's an interesting thought, because the Mariners, if the meta is to trade from your major league roster, well, the Mariners in theory have some outfield depth. They certainly have more outfield depth than they do anywhere else. And Raley's going to be interesting to a team like the Padres. They need a left fielder. Raley could play left. And obviously he's, making the league minimum, so they would save $10 million. And so in exchange for that, you get maybe it's a 4A player. I don't know, but you get another shot at finding a third baseman, one that has some upside, and one that if I'm not mistaken, it could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure we got told that the Mariners were interested.
Maybe
in Rosario.
I can't remember.
I can't remember for sure, but I know that we got asked about it. I can't remember in what context, but
sure.
So yeah, I think it was pretty interesting, but I was like, I think it probably falls apart a little bit. I think maybe there are avenues you could take to kind of get there, but as it was presented to me right there, I said, I don't think the Mariners would do that, but I think they should consider something like that if they can find it, if it makes sense for them, money wise and long term. But yeah, I just thought that was an interesting idea.
Taylor Rogers to the Reds just happened. All right. Hey, so Ha-seong Kim, veteran infielder who spent the last few seasons with the Padres, just signed with the Tampa Bay Rays on a 2-year, $29 million deal. Kind of an interesting player when it comes to the Mariners for a multitude of reasons. That's why we're talking about him today. One, obviously Kim is coming off of an injury. He's coming off of surgery. He's not going to be able to play until at least May, which on the surface, considering how limited the Mariners front office's budget is, you would think that's a no-go, spending what would basically be the rest of what they have available to them on a guy that's not going to be able to play on opening day, is going to have to spend, the rest of the year playing catch up, essentially, whenever he does eventually get back. Right. Yep. But on the other hand, they also tried to trade for Nico Hoerner. They were very aggressive on that. Nico Hoerner is also not going to be able to start the season healthy. So I think we've already talked about this before on Locked On. At least we've talked about it on the Patreon show. But I would assume that the difference there is just obviously they were also going to trade Castillo in the Hoerner deal. They would have saved more money. That would have allowed them to do more stuff. Whereas, signing Kim would basically be it for the rest of the offseason, you would think. And also they might just like Nico Hoerner more than Ha-seong Kim. Yep. But still, it's an interesting contrast. in that regard.
Sure.
And like I pointed out today on Twitter, it's kind of hard to make a case for and against Kim when it comes to the Mariners, because like on one hand, yeah, you would be essentially spending the rest of your budget on a guy that's not going to play right away. Again, is going to be playing catch up, etc. But on the other hand, are you actually able to do something better with that money at this point? I don't know.
It's like, because I'd probably, I don't know. It's like, would you rather take a shot on Kim, or would you rather go get like Moncada and Iglesias and maybe like another player?
Yeah.
Now, we don't know the exact breakdown of this trade in terms of what he's going to make in year one, or of this deal. We don't know what he's going to make in year one. So obviously it's topical with the Mariners and needing infielders, and Kim, probably the most expensive infielder left on the market, obviously aside from Bregman and Alonso, who they have no shot at because they choose to not have a shot at them, but whatever. So yeah, that's interesting. But I mean, immediately to me, like my first thought was like, wow, that's kind of weird. But also, are the Rays all of a sudden going to be more realistic in trade talks with some of their infielders?
Yeah.
Because, Kim's going to come back in May, they hope. You have Caballero there. Caminero is going to be the third baseman. Like, you already have Caballero, you have Lowe, you have Meade, you have Palacios, you have, Walls. Like, do you have a lot of guys who play second and shortstop in theory? Mm-hmm. So, like,
yeah.
Could they? I mean, maybe.
Yeah. I know, obviously, Brandon Lau is the guy that stands out the most here, but I know you've been a big Curtis Meade guy. So do you want to refresh the people on that, or, if people haven't heard that idea from you before, just tell them a little bit about that?
Yeah, Curtis Meade is, kind of a former top 100 prospect. He's only 23, 24, so it's not like he is super old or anything like that, and he just aged out. He's gotten some run at the major league level. It's gone okay, but he hasn't gotten any consistent playing time at the big league level. Third base might be a bit of a stretch for him. He's played some second as well, but I think a lot of people assume he's going to end up at first base. But again, if you're the Mariners, like, you're probably willing to take the shot on him playing second or third for you this year at the very least. And he's just a very, kind of just good hitter. He hits the gaps very well, lots of doubles. He's probably going to hit for a high average, gets on base. The power, probably 15, 20 home run power. Nothing amazing, but it's certainly playable, particularly at second. Even at third, he'd be fine. So yeah, I like Curtis Meade. He's cheap in terms of salary. And yeah, basically any deal we've talked about with the Rays, I have been eager to attach Curtis Meade to that deal to try and give the Mariners another option at third base. Like, I would rather, I think Curtis Meade is a significantly better chance to hit than Ryan Bliss, for example. So that is a move that I would like to see them make. Yeah, I mean, it just kind of seems like Meade just slowly keeps on getting pushed further and further down the depth chart. Obviously, Caminero's the third baseman, and then with Lau and with Palacios and with Walls and with Caballero, like,
once
all those
Kim
guys
gets involved. Yeah.
Right. Kim will be the shortstop. All those guys will shift over to second base, and just like, okay, they're not going to pick, and they have Xavier Isaacs, I think is his name, first base prospect. He's going to be up probably at the end of this year at first base. They still have Yandy on that roster. There's just not a lot of room for Curtis Meade to get at bat. So I wonder if that's a guy that the Mariners can go get. He is certainly one of those, like, hey, let's give him the opportunity type of guys. And you hope that it's not necessarily a change of scenery guy, but it's just like, hey, this guy kind of got squeezed out of his last spot. Let's
kind
give
of
him
a Ty France thing.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
It's a very similar idea to Ty France. Yeah. And honestly, I think pretty similar hitter to what France was when he came over.
So now that Kim's off the board, not that we were really thinking that he was an option for the Mariners, but now that Kim's off the board, Bregman's still the guy that seems to be, the Mariners are obviously waiting on, but it seems to be, other teams are also waiting on, and other free agents might be waiting on as well. But after Bregman, What's left?
Well, I mean, like, I would personally be talking to the Rays right now about Brandon Lau before I would talk about any of the other free agent options. Just because, Lau just seems like a Mariner, right? He has for a couple years now. And again, you talk about guys getting pushed out. Well, Lau's making $10 million this year or whatever. Like, you have plenty of second basemen, like we talked about. And obviously you probably want to get out of that now. He's a little bit older. He's been hurt a lot. So I think if I were Seattle, I'd be pushing pretty aggressively for Lau. In terms of free agents that are available. Yeah, I think you're looking at the usual suspects. Brendan Rodgers is still out there. Jose Iglesias is still out there. Yoan Moncada is still out there, who's been linked to the Mariners. Like, he probably the first player that we heard linked to the Mariners all off season
for sure. Yeah.
Was Moncada. He's still out there. Paul DeYoung is still floating around out there. If you just want some power and good defense, and you don't care about on base or average or whatever, like, you could do worse than Paul DeYoung at third base. You're currently doing worse than Paul DeYoung at third base. So, yeah, I think it's just the usual suspects. I don't think there's anybody that, free agent wise, it's Iglesias, Rodgers, DeYoung, and then just kind of a bunch of like minor league-ish type of guys, minor league signing type of guys. So yeah, I would, if I were Seattle, I'd be pretty aggressive on the Brandon Lau front, but based on some of the things I've heard about their asking prices for some of their players, I wouldn't be too optimistic about that. But Lau probably is going to be cheaper than some of the other players the Mariners have talked to them about in the past. But yeah, Curtis Mead is absolutely a guy. Like, I'd rather go get Curtis Mead and give him a shot at third base than Dylan Moore and Paul DeYoung and Ryan Bliss, like anybody that the Mariners could reasonably have. But yeah, I think, like, I would say it seems likely that Moncada is going to be their guy at third base this year, but they haven't signed him yet. And I don't know, like, if they haven't signed him yet at this point, I don't know.
Yeah. So it's interesting.
Go get Brandon Lau.
I mean, you're starting to run out of options. You're getting, you're not at this point yet, but you're getting closer to the point where you're like, all right, is this guy really that much better than just letting Ryan Bliss play second base? You're getting close to that point, which is like the ultimate failure for you this offseason.
No disrespect to Ryan Bliss, but yes, 100% yes. Yeah. Like, Willie Castro's still out there, guys. And I know, like, the Twins probably, it's not going to make it work. Find a way to make it work. Go get Willie Castro, go get Brandon Lau, and then, let the third base be the position where you go for some upside and you go like, hey, let's give Curtis Mead a shot, or hey, let's see if Moncada bounces back. Like, that's where you try that. But go get like somebody who solidifies one of the infield spots at the very least, and then take your shot on the second guy. And I think the guy who solidifies the infield is probably on the team right now. So you're gonna have to go trade for that guy and then finish off the infield by giving Moncada a couple $1 million. I don't know what he's gonna make this year, but sure doesn't seem like it's gonna be more than $3 or $4 million.
Yeah. All right. Well, on that note, that's going to do it for us. Thank you so much for joining us here on the Locked On Mariners podcast. For Colby Patnode, I'm Titan Gonzalez. Be sure to give us a follow on Twitter at LO_Mariners. You can follow me at Titan Gonzalez. Colby at CPAT11, that's CPAT11. We're also on Blue Sky. You can follow me at TDG, Colby at MLB Colby, the show at Locked On Mariners. Have yourself a beautiful baseball day, and we'll see you next time. Peace.